Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Glick. And if this is your first time joining us, each week when you tune in, you're going to hear one of two different types of shows. Sometimes when you tune in, we have on individuals associated with the land development industry. We hear about their origin story, and then we dig into some of the projects that they have going on. Then other times, like today, we have industry news. That's where we pull up a few different headlines and we talk through what it means for our industry. And joining me as always is Charles Covey. Charles, how's it going?
Hey, hey.
All right. So we have a lot going on in this world right now that is
Yeah, we do.
impacting a lot of things, life in general, but also our industry is definitely being impacted by a lot of what's going on. And so as we dig into today's articles, we have a few different topics we're going to get into related to the Fed, related to the the housing market and what some projections look like coming into 2025, and then also the devastation that we've all watched unfold in North Carolina from Hurricane Helene, and just a lot going on there as well. And so outside of I mean, just the crazy impact that it's having on so many lives and everything there, and just a lot of sad stories coming out of that part of the country. There's also an impact to the industry related to that as well, just with some of the things going on, whether it's insurance and things of that nature. So definitely an episode today where we're going to cover quite a few different topics, and yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the first article here. So the first one comes to us from Fox Business. Headline reads, "Market still thinks the Fed needs to cut." So this one is actually a video. So for those of you who are watching, you're going to see the video play. And those of you who are listening in, which is really most of you who listen into the episode each week, you're going to be able to hear the audio from this video that's going to be playing from Fox Business. So let's go ahead and flip over. We're going to listen to this quick soundbite. It's just a couple minutes long, and then we will react to what they have to say here.
What does this mean now, Kenny, for a Fed rate cut? I think the futures are showing maybe it went from 50% chance of a 0.5% cut in November last week. Now that number's down to 12%. Does the Fed need to cut 0.5% now?
Well, so look, on the top line, 254,000 is a huge number, right? 114,000 more than what the expectation was. But if you really pull back the covers, look underneath, there were government jobs and there were low-paying jobs. So is that really the sign of a healthy economy? Which is why I think that the futures, the market started to rally, because I think the market still thinks that the Fed needs to cut. Yet, if you look at what happened in the bond market, the bond market is up, which would suggest that the Fed is not going to cut, or rates are going up, not down. So it's a little bit confused right now, and I think there's going to be a lot of analysis over the weekend trying to figure it out. I do think that it is an election year. They wanted a big number up front. I think they want to continue cutting rates. They just have to find a reason they have to couch it in a reason that makes sense.
We'll have to leave it there. Kenny, great stuff as always. Have yourself a great weekend. I'm sure you're cooking up something delicious this weekend as well. He is the master chef.
So coming out of that, I guess a couple things coming into this that I do think has been, we talk a lot on here about just the data that is used to make certain decisions, whether it's data that the Fed uses to make decisions, but also a lot of the numbers that are put out to the public. I think we have to look back at, and he made this point there, but you have to look back at back to 2020, right? When this, the world was basically shut down. And when that happened, there was a lot of job loss. And so I think it's the two things that he mentioned really stand out in my mind are things that I've really thought about. Number one is, what's the number, like how much are we rebounding from what happened there? Like, it's not necessarily net new jobs that are being added. Like, until we get to where we were prior to that time, we're still just trying to play catch up to get back to where we were at. And secondarily, when you're talking about government jobs that are created, I mean, those aren't, who's paying for those jobs, right? It's not, it's coming out of tax dollars, it's coming out of things like that. So I don't like to see federal or any government type jobs included in jobs reports, because I feel like it's very misleading. But anyway, those are two things from this that really stood out to me in the jobs report. What are your thoughts, Charles?
Well, just to talk about jobs for a minute, something that, and I talk about this pretty often, I think that we have a lot of really bad data gathering and data usage that is going into the decision making at a high level, and that's disappointing because the way that they're gathering and using data on jobs, as an example, it wouldn't work in a progressive business. So how is it working in the government? That's frustrating because if you go and dive into some of the job numbers, part-time jobs, because a lot of people are getting a second gig, right? A side gig, if you will. And a lot of those part-time jobs are counted as a job in the job numbers. Well, that's not a true measure. And like you said, to the point of the government jobs, a lot of these jobs are lower paying. A lot of these jobs don't really contribute to the GDP in any meaningful way. And so it's not a good number to even put in the mix. So I think we're looking at some really bad data, and I hate that because now we're trying to analyze data that may not even really have much of a use at all. So you and I talked about this before. I don't think anybody knows. So we've got a bunch of talking heads, and you and I included, and we're postulating what we think might happen, and nobody knows. There's too many things up in the air right now. So it's fascinating to me though, and I talk about this all the time. I think we're using bad data.
Yeah, I think reading a couple other articles that I had seen, it's still, and this you had mentioned, I think on our last episode that we did, that we're likely to see in the meeting, so in the November meeting and then the December meeting with the Fed, likely to see a quarter point and then a quarter point, potentially for a half point more from this point until the end of the year. It seems like that's what most of this data is still indicating. That's going to happen after. I think the next meeting happens after the election too.
Right.
But any more these days, I know the election, you don't necessarily know the results of the election on the day of the election or the night of the election. So I don't know if by that meeting things will be sorted out and where we'll be sitting as a country and what direction we'll be heading or anything like that. I don't know that that will impact what the Fed decides to do, but it is something that's definitely in play with the election, just right around the corner from when we're recording this. And when this comes out, we're just less than a month away from the election, so it's coming up pretty fast.
Yeah, the confidence in two more rate cuts was a lot higher 2 weeks ago than it is today. So that's an interesting element. I think the market's pricing in a much lower percentage chance, maybe a barely a double digit chance of that happening versus what was probably a 50% chance of that happening a couple weeks ago. So we'll see how that changes in the next 2 weeks. But I think it's definitely up in the air. That if they're using the bad data from the jobs numbers, that's not helpful. I still think that the two rate cuts are probably a good thing. I think it's something that we, at least in our business, I think it's something that we need to get things back moving. So uh, something that you and I have mentioned before, those rate cuts aren't really, we're not going to see big effect in the real estate business for at least 90 to 120 days. We got to get into next year. I'll give you an example. So if you think about this, if let's say I've got an apartment deal that it's been on ice, right? Because numbers didn't make sense. Now we get a full rate point or a full 1 point reduction. Now things are like, the lenders are wanting to move more. So the sentiment is better. And now you can make this deal happen. You can't just turn it on and it just happens immediately. Like, it's still going to take you a while to get this thing actually closed. And then it's going to take even longer for that to actually start up and money to start flowing, into the construction process. So before we really see meaningful change in the commercial real estate market, it's going to be, probably mid next year if they do these two more rate cuts.
Yep. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next article here. So we've got another video for you on this one. This one comes to us from CNBC. This one is a video of the Redfin CEO talking on inventory. I guess the headline reads, "Inventory will be the gating factor for home sales in 2025." So again, we're going to pull up this video, listen to what they have to say, and we'll kind of talk through our thoughts on it here. So let's go ahead and get this video playing.
Joining us today is Redfin CEO Glenn Kelman. Glenn, always good to get your intelligence and insight on this stuff. What did you see in September?
We saw an improvement at long last. We had seen interest rates fall in August, and homebuyers had almost no reaction because they were waiting for the Federal Reserve to cut rates. That finally happened, and now many people who had been on the fence are coming back into the market. It's not a tidal wave, but it's a real swell.
I was going to say, we've seen some other, for example, we got an upgrade of Home Depot the other day. They did a survey asking homeowners or home buyers who have been waiting to buy, what's the magic number in terms of the rate that could get them off the sideline? Where do you think that number is?
Well, already we're seeing more people come off the sidelines. So home buying demand is up about 10%. Purchase applications are up about 10%. So there's been a market increase. And every time rates come down further, we'll see more. This rate cut was probably too late in the season to have a major impact on 2024. But I think in 2025, many home buyers are going to say, game on.
So in light of that, Glenn, what is it going to take to see more meaningful levels of inventory hit the market? I mean, rates coming down is certainly one piece of the puzzle, but what else needs to kick into gear here?
That's the right question. And on that front, I don't expect to see much progress. We're talking to many people who are rate locked. They got a mortgage at 3% or 3.5% a few years ago, and they still can't afford to buy their own home. 2.5% of American homes changed hands in the past 12 months, which is a 30-year low. So on the inventory side, we are still going to be crimped, and that is going to be the gating factor for home sales in 2025. Maybe we'll go up to 4.5 million from a low of 3.9 million this year, but it isn't going to be 5 million or 6 million because there just aren't enough people who want to sell their home.
So I want to ask you, because you haven't been on since this change went into effect, but I do wonder what you're seeing in terms of industry dynamics since that brokerage industry practice, those changes actually came in August.
Well, it's a tale of two markets. There are places where there hasn't been much change at all. So if you go to North Carolina or New Jersey, almost all home buyers agents are being paid about 3%. But in other markets like San Francisco or Boston, there are significant negotiations taking place. Part of it is that homes are just more expensive there, and so people are asking their agent for a better deal. So it's been market by market. Some of that's just about how hidebound the market is, and some of it is about how high the home prices are. But increasingly, listings are being put on the market where the seller says, what I pay the buyer's agent is negotiable, and multiple offers may come in, one with a fee of 3%, one with a fee of 2%. All else being equal, they're going to take the offer that only has to pay 2% to the buyer's agent. So we're going to see more activity in the spring. That's when I expect more bidding wars, and that's when I expect more pressure on fees. Right now, we're just going through this trial period, and in some places there's negotiation, and in some places there isn't much.
As for rates, Glenn, the market's counting on continued interest rate cuts all the way through the first half of next year. And I wonder how good you think the spring could be if, in fact, that happens, no guarantees, or whether or not activity surprises us in the offseason.
Well, I think it can be medium good, but as I said, it can't be great because there's still so many homes on the sidelines. There's not going to be a rush to list properties. Usually when we go through a housing market correction, we correct the problems that we had. So in 2008, there were too many people underwater on their mortgage, and then we saw a wave of foreclosures and short sales. But this time, the inventory shortage hasn't been addressed, and I think it's going to be a long-term problem. It's a 30-year mortgage that many people have, and they're only 5 years into it. So I think the market can get better, but it's not going to be like gangbusters next year. And there's still some inflationary pressure, especially if the longshoremen go on strike. So better days are ahead, but we're not out of the woods yet.
So I was jotting down a few things as he was going through there. A couple things that reiterate some of the talking points that we've had previously, and something that I've even talked about personally, just with me being locked into a low interest home loan. Personally, I'm not rushing out to go find a new home because I'm not really interested in flipping to a higher rate. And so I think that's, like he said, and I hadn't really thought of it in terms of the fact that, most people are on 30-year fixed mortgages. Well, if they're 5 years into that mortgage, how long is it going to be until rates get to a point where they would, as he put it, be able to truly even afford their own home at those new rates? Because that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, that most people can't even afford their own homes if they were to have to purchase their home at that higher rate. And so, yeah, I don't know. I look at this more so as what is it going to, what do we need to do to get the people off the sideline, and less about, existing inventory coming online and becoming available, just because I don't see that as being something that is going to happen anytime real soon. I think it's going to be more so the new construction segment of the industry, and what that is able to do to provide, inventory out there for these individuals looking to get in the market and buy homes. And so I know that was what really stuck out to me, is really just the lack of inventory, that it's going to be up to the new construction to be able to bring that into play, because existing people who are already have those low fixed rate mortgages they're not going to be selling their homes anytime soon.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this several times already, and I think that's still continues to be the theme, is that the existing inventory is not moving. So that puts builders in a really good position over the next year. I think that new homes are still going to be the flavor of the day. It's probably going to continue for a while. Now, what is going to be fascinating to me is that I think, generally speaking, we're going to see a little bit of a downtick in construction costs over the next year. We're not talking about big numbers, but a few percent. And so, in theory, if we did see that, you might be getting new homes being built below the replacement cost of an existing product. And so then now you've got an existing product that then that person wants to sell later, and it's really not price competitive with the new product. I don't know that we're there yet, but I could see that being a really fascinating dilemma if we got into that position. So who knows if I think we may have averted the longshoreman strike. Is that right? Did they get that solved?
Yeah, it sounds like they went off of strike. I don't know if it's officially solved yet as of the time that we're recording this, but I do know that they halted the strike while
Yeah.
they're in negotiations right now.
So I don't think we're going to be able to create a radically deflationary environment, but we could at least curb inflation to where we're in low single digits. I don't think we'll get to zero, but I think we can keep it low. So anyway, we've talked around this issue a bunch of different times and still continue to be the same thing. There is going to be a pickup in home sales next year, but it looks like the majority of those will be new home sales and probably not a lot of existing inventory. So to kind of wrap that up, I think generally speaking, we're going to have to see rates get down into the fives, low fives, before somebody at a 3% is willing to move.
Yeah, and like we've talked about in the past, with the number of people who are on the sidelines, looking to get in and purchase a home. Like, if that is the percentage that they're willing, or that they're looking for, yeah, like, are they coming from, if they're coming from a like relocating from one state to another state, where they, maybe California to Texas or whatever, maybe they're able to get around the whole interest rate stuff, if they're able to, have more cash from a sale in
Right.
a market where prices are higher and things of that nature. So
Right.
we could have situations like that, since we are seeing a pretty high number of people moving and migrating out of states like California to Texas or to Florida. And so anyway, it'll be interesting to watch this. And then on top of all of it, we've got an election here in the next month, that we've looked at a number of articles that have talked about the psychology of the consumer, and how the
Right.
consumer is very much looking at the outcome of that election as to what they're going to do, or they at least want to wait until the election is over before they make any type of decision. And we don't know if that means that they need to wait until after, a month after the election, or until the inauguration, into 2025. So there's just a lot going on right now that we don't really know of what's going to happen. But anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any specific direction, and I don't think that path is going to form itself for us until post-election, probably post-inauguration. So really, it's a couple of months, 2 or 3 months of us just kind of, we're all chasing our tails, guessing what may or may not happen. But I think it's going to be January before we really start to see these things play out and see what's actually going to happen.
Yep. All right. Well, let's move on to the final article number 3. Headline, this one comes to us from Globe Street. Headline reads, CRE owners brace for rising costs and declining values after Helene. So reading from this article, Hurricane Helene is a story that keeps developing. The death toll is more than 130 at the moment. And this is, of course, as of this article coming out, the end of last week, with more potentially to be reported. Then there is property and other damage, and trying to estimate that without disregard for loss of life is ultimately a more complicated and uncertain task for accounting. However, aside from what has recently happened, there's the question of what will going forward. It's not a comforting picture. Continuing from the article, as Strepp recently noted, there are multiple ways to look at the hurricane's impact on commercial real estate, including physical damage, insurance expenses, property values, and business interruption. The last, while not directly connected to property owners leasing to tenants, is important because it could affect occupier revenues and their abilities to pay rent. Physical damage, repair costs, and insurance expenses are the most obvious to start. A high wind hurricane can cause immense damage over a huge area because of the physical spread of the storm and its movement into new territory. Trepp used the Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Florida MSA to compare basic metrics averaged over all CRE property types from 2019 to 2023. High intensity storms like Helene will become more likely, according to climate scientist. Trepp says that coastal regions are at high risk, and CRE properties there may see values decline from affected cash flows or increased damage and loss. Occupancy rates will likely drop. Increased damage and loss could drive cap rates upward. Temporary and permanent business closures will also hit property owners. All this could also affect debt service coverage ratios. So, not to go, I mean, there's obviously a lot here beyond the impact to our, to our industry and things of that nature. There's just a lot of terrible things that have happened there, and there's things too. Not that we're a political show by any means. Obviously, we focus on the industry and everything like that. But before we pressed record, I was just telling you, like, you look at this whole situation at large and what happened in North Carolina, and more notably, you look at the response to it, the response, from the government to it as well. And, I just this past weekend, I'm sitting there writing checks to the IRS for my quarterly estimates, tax estimates. And it just is really frustrating to see what has happened. And the fact that, I'm paying in my tax dollars, we're all paying in our tax dollars. And, we get to see that money not go to the people who need it most here in the homeland. We see that money go, overseas to foreign nations before our own people. And so it's been really frustrating to watch, even outside of anything related to our industry and just the lives that have been impacted and everything like that. I do know that, of course, there is a direct impact to the industry, as you look at this and what it's going to do, especially to those insurance rates and everything that are going to happen in areas that the insurance underwriters are going to deem to be, high risk, and everything. But yeah, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this. Obviously a tough thing to see happen.
Yeah. So there's some far-reaching effects. I think that there's another hurricane headed to Tampa now. It's going to cut right across the middle of Florida, and then they're saying it could run up the East Coast and hit Charleston and Savannah and those areas. These type of events, now you've got all the rebuilding, so that affects lumber prices, that affects all these other items, which hurts the scenario of us trying to keep inflation down. So storms like this tend to take inflation up because of their effect on all the, now you've got insurance money covering this stuff, and it's not quite as price sensitive. And so then things, inevitably, material prices in Florida go up, and then material from around the country is funneling to Florida, or if you're in South Carolina or Tennessee, for the damage there. So I think there's going to be some far-reaching effects. Now, the other thing is, I think there are also people, even friends of mine, who live in some of these areas that have been affected, and they're like, do I really need to be here? Do I really need my business to be here? Like, is it worth, do I like the beach enough to deal with this risk of having this flood problem or damage problem that I'm dealing with? And I just had a conversation with somebody today about that. They're like, I have a nice house on the water. I like it, except when there's hurricanes, and there are hurricanes. And I'm starting to think that's maybe not something I want to do anymore. So I'm wondering just what the far-reaching effects are for businesses in general in Florida, because we're seeing, across real estate, the increase in insurance in Florida has been really unbelievable. I think there were some numbers in one of those articles that gave a percentage. Do you remember, Ryan, what that was?
I don't remember off the top of my
It
head.
was in there, and it was staggering, right? So the insurance number, in most of the deals that we do, insurance is not it's not a make or break scenario. But in Florida, it's become such a significant increase that in some cases it is a make or break scenario on a deal. And I don't think that we're going to do anything but see this go up. If you get a couple more disasters come in, now you've got carriers that are leaving Florida, and it gets out of control. So there are some far-reaching effects. It's a very unfortunate scenario. There is the loss of life too, which is terrible. But I think we're going to see this effect. Kind of, there's the ripple effect, if you will, across commercial real estate.
Yeah, and like you said, with the next, this next hurricane coming into, what that's going to do, how, what type of damage is it going to do? How are people prepared for it? What's the response look like and everything? And so, yeah, I mean, by the next time we talk, we'll see what that looks like. Hopefully, this is the last of the storms. I haven't really looked at hurricane data to see what's normal as far as like total number of hurricanes that happen on a given year. There's been some big hurricanes that have happened. I think there's just different areas that are being hit versus in the past. A lot of times it'd be we've seen a lot in the Gulf and a lot of communities there drastically impacted, and now we're starting to see just some more impacts happening in just different areas, which I feel like, at least from what I can remember, I haven't seen quite to this level of what we saw with Helene.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's the last of our articles. Anything else you want to add before we come to a close here today?
Yeah, just something you and I were chatting about earlier. It feels to and we both were just saying, like, we don't make this a political show, but we all have our own thoughts about the political climate, regardless of where you are on that. And I think we'll talk more about politics as we get closer to the election, just because it's something that we all want to discuss. It just feels like this is a pretty significant time for us as a country. And the closer we get, and the more information we see, it's like it just almost feels heavy. Was the term that we use? Like, it's just like this is a big deal, and there's a lot of things going on even without the election. So it just feels like this is a very pivotal time for all of us that are in real estate in any way, shape, or form. Like, there's no way that this doesn't end up being one of the most significant times of our entire careers, just because of all the things at play. So, very interesting, very fascinating. I think it just behooves all of us to stay very much in tune, and tune into us, tune into other sources. We're going to give you the best possible information that we can, and I'm having a good time doing it. There's a lot going on, and this is a joy for me every couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, likewise. And yeah, I don't think anybody out there who has been listening in to us regularly, I think they know where I stand on a lot of these issues, and well, you as well on them, because we have talked about it briefly. But I can tell you this, that uh, our dollars don't go quite as far as they used to. So I do know this, proof every week by our grocery bill and everything else that happens. So
Yeah, no doubt.
um, well, anyway, we'll go ahead and call it a close here today. If you're listening in for the first time, would really appreciate you clicking that subscribe button or tapping that subscribe button if you're listening on your mobile. And if you've never checked out one of our episodes on YouTube, hey, head over there and give us a follow on YouTube. We, as I said at the outset, most of you are listening in on, Apple and Spotify and different podcasting platforms, but we do put a video version of this out there. So definitely check that out if you want to see some of the headlines on the screen, or you want to watch the videos that we pull up and everything. But with that said, we will call it a close, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you.